Hello, everybody. My name is Vasyl Pekhnyo. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite you to watch this live update on Ukrainian battlefield events. Let me say like this, please join us, subscribe to this YouTube channel, like this video, and also share it with your friends. Also comment, don't forget about comments under this video. So let's start. I will start with one unique special forces operation which Ukraine made in Black Sea. So let's start with that.
Your attention to the screen. So what am I showing? This is one of the posts by Russian Z propagandists who wrote that apparently the day before yesterday in the Black Sea, Ukrainian naval drones destroyed Russian special forces who were landing on one of the rigs, the so-called Boyko Towers, gas extraction platforms in the Black Sea. So what are the Russians writing here? As soon as our special forces land on the platform specifically, they send in specialists whose qualifications are unique. Enemy immediately starts destroying them, like in a shooting gallery, firing at them from afar with heavy machine guns, and also attacking with BEKs, that is unmanned boats, with FPV. So what's the logic of this process? What's happening? The Russians are constantly landing their specialists on the platforms. Why are they doing this? Why are these platforms of interest to them? By the way, here are some great photos of how our backs shot up these platforms. Why are the Russians doing this? They are interested in the platforms as a means to monitor our maritime movements in the Black Sea. Their electronic warfare equipment and other radio technical devices are also installed, which make it possible to better detect and gain situational awareness about events taking place in the Black Sea. Ultimately, to track those same unmanned boats, which we call sea drones, and similar things. To observe how our aviation operates, where missiles are shot down, what is used to shoot down the missiles, and so on and so forth. Accordingly, in order to have all these special equipment, the Russians are constantly sending their specialists there so that they can set up this equipment. And now they're complaining that, as it turns out, our maritime drones, together with FPVs and heavy machine guns, are shooting up these towers in this way. In particular, one of these operations was carried out just recently. Overall, the situation in the Black Sea is very interesting right now. I think in the coming days, it will be possible to talk in more detail about it, about certain additional scenarios that are unfolding there, because the blockade of Crimea, the peninsula, hasn't been called off, in fact, and this task military blockade and the isolation of the peninsula is still ongoing, just like the military blockade and isolation of southern Ukraine. And now there are significantly more indications that our military is actually succeeding in this. Just consider the operation that took place this past weekend involving the destruction ported by the Southern Defense Forces on Saturday. That is June 7th off, an entire train convoy carrying enemy equipment that was moving in the southern direction, apparently with the aim of opening up additional, more active sections of the front there in order to stretch our forces along the entire front line. So there in Zaporizhia, it was reported that an entire warehouse, an entire train convoy was destroyed along with at least 13 tanks. This was exactly the kind of somewhat sensational report from the General Staff on the morning of June 7th, Saturday, stating that a total of 15 tanks were destroyed on the front and 13 of them were destroyed by the Southern Defense Forces during their movement. That is, our long-range strike capabilities are now working very actively against the railways and logistics. This corridor, this corridor is at most 100 kilometers wide. Right here, the maximum is 100 kilometers. It has long been discussed and said that for long-range systems, including drones, this corridor will soon become a kill zone where the enemy is destroyed. And this is, let's say, the absolute reality that we are moving toward. The Russians must be destroyed here. Essentially, this is the only way that through the demilitarization of this zone and the destruction of their logistics and equipment, there will ever be a chance at some point in the future to reclaim these territories by military means. Because any kind of general military operations here are simply unthinkable. But thanks to long-range systems, we know that our drone forces have already presented drones that operate in tandem. It's like a drone mothership, a base drone that carries several small FPV drones, and in this way they can already reach at least 60 kilometers. Plus, fiber optics technology is developing. A fiber optic cable stretching 35 kilometers is no longer, so to speak, anything special. Both sides are using fiber optics 35 kilometers long, and there are no countermeasures against it. This is simply a fantastic technological leap forward in what is happening now at the front. Accordingly, in this salient, the occupiers will now be heavily targeted, and their logistics will be destroyed as well. Therefore, I think that in the future, we will see many more very interesting actions that will take place here in the territory of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. In addition, it is worth noting that, for example, on the left bank of the Kherson region, our aviation is operating very skillfully and quite extensively. The MiG-29, you can see in the video, are MiG-29 destroying the positions of enemy UAV operators. The launch sites where the enemy launches FPV drones, well, these drone operators were detected, and then they didn't hesitate to use a full airstrike against them. In fact, this is a trend that is very noticeable in the south. Aviation is being used specifically against UAV operators. And here, by the way, it's worth bringing up a topic that was touched on yesterday by Serhiy Flesh, a well-known specialist in the field of communications, radio electronics, and related areas. He talks about the fact that for now, we have disproportion in the awarding of so-called YE-dash or YE-indent points. To avoid saying it outright, so there is a problem with the YE points that are awarded to our unit for eliminating UAV operators. Let's briefly explain what these YE points are. Every UAV unit in the Ukrainian environment, in the Ukrainian Defense Forces, is awarded a certain number of points for destroying high-value targets. And these points are added up, creating a ranking table where each unit, depending on its position at the end of the month, can, so to speak, order additional drones from the state using these points. For example, they can order something like, we want 40 vampires based on the results of the month. Well, that's just an example. And accordingly, the more of these points you have, the higher the position you can claim, the more and better drones you can get from the government, the better specialists you can potentially attract in the future, because you'll have more drones and overall you'll have fewer problems with supplies. So basically, they've set up something like a sports tournament among the fighters. Overall, the story is alive. The story is moving along very well. But this is a system that, as Serhiy Flesh points out, contains a very serious element of unfairness, which specifically affects UAV operators. Because an ordinary Russian infantryman is valued at 12 points, while a drone operator is only worth 3.2. So in fact, a drone operator is valued 4 times less than an ordinary Russian infantryman, that Shmobik stormtrooper. Okay, maybe Shmobik isn't the right word, but the one who is sent as cannon fodder. And yet, UAV operators now make up the main striking force. In reality, that's how it really is. And therefore, it is a fundamentally serious problem that we need to increase the value of UAV operators so that our fighters have more motivation to destroy them. This is the kind of issue that I will at least raise in today's review, and I believe it's the right thing to talk about, because the value of an assault trooper simply cannot be the same as that of a UAV operator. Even though drones now perform up to 80% of the target engagement functions on the front line. By the way, one more thing about UAVs. Commander-in-Chief Siversky yesterday published a post stating that a record-breaking number of enemy vehicles were destroyed in May, over 3,500 vehicles. That's just for May for the past Tauza, for the past week, month 3,575 vehicles, units of automotive equipment, vehicles 80. And in total, since the beginning of the year, more than 18,000 vehicles have been destroyed, friends. What does this indicate? That drones are truly performing their tasks very, very effectively. And there is now a trend toward increasing the range of drones. And there is a significant need to change the approach to logistics. That is why, for example, in my own volunteer work, I personally place special emphasis on ground robotic systems, on GRS, which provide frontline logistics in some of our units where there are enough GRS, meaning these kinds of robots on 4 wheels or not necessarily on wheels. These can be robots on trucks or whatever else. So they provide 90 to 95% of the logistics for frontline areas. Because it's safer, I personally have a story, literally a recent one, where it was possible. I'm not going to give details now because it's not appropriate, but a top-notch elite unit managed to purchase an expensive drone that cost almost 1 million hryvnias. They spent a long time raising money for it, and it was actually destroyed during its very first combat mission. It was transporting ammunition. But there is a great relief, They destroyed a piece of machinery, not the person, the one transporting it, or even the people who might have been transporting that ammunition, for example, in a vehicle that could have just as easily been destroyed by an enemy FPV drone in no time. They destroyed the drone, but to hell with it, we'll build a new one, we'll raise money for another. But thank God, and most importantly, the people involved in this process are alive. Of course, it's a pity about the drone, but it's just a piece of machinery. That's why this worldview aspect regarding change needs to take place. And when it comes to reorienting towards UAV operators, this issue also needs to be addressed. By the way, returning to the topic of aviation, although actually it's not certain that it was aviation, it could have been an anti-aircraft missile system on the territory of Sumy region or the border area of Sumy region. To be more specific, near Tyotkino on the enemy side, as far as I know, it was in this area over the weekend that an enemy fighter jet was shot down, the best enemy fighter jet currently in service with the Russian army, the Su-35. So what exactly happened? Somehow our troops managed to set up an ambush for the Russians. How exactly? These details are not being disclosed. There are various insiders there. Some people are saying that it could have been an F-16 that shot it down. Well, theoretically, that's possible given the AIM-120M missiles. Similarly, some have suggested that it could have been a Mirage with long-range Mica missiles. But as far as I know, if I'm not mistaken, their range is 60 to 80 kilometers. That's not enough to effectively counter enemy aircraft. Some suggest that it was an anti-aircraft missile system that our troops had hidden somewhere, waiting for those enemy Sukhoi jets to appear. In short, the plane was shot down. And in fact, just like last week's destruction of the Iskander missile launchers, which, by the way, the president confirmed over the weekend, was not just one, but 3 Iskander launchers destroyed. This is a very good indicator that now the Russians have to think more carefully about whether it's possible and safe to use their aircraft or to use those same launch sites for ballistic missiles in the Bryansk region, whether it's safe to do so or whether we have some hidden capabilities to detect them and strike from long range. Because in reality, the argument made by people who say, what's the big deal about 3 destroyed Iskander launchers if the Russians still have 160 left, is actually relevant. Yes, you're right, friends. But on the other hand, now they have to think about those 160. Are you willing to risk them or not? Are you willing to risk a Su-35 or not? The one flying to the Sumy region with the aim of deblocking Russian troops who have really found themselves in a difficult situation here now in the area of the settlement of Tyotkin. As I have already said and will repeat more than once, we have absolutely no need to enter this settlement, but there's a complete necessity to keep it under fire control from 3 sides. It would make sense for the Russians to cut the front here along the dashed frontier line that is to retreat. But this would mean that they would have to abandon Tyotino, and they cannot do that. They have a political objective, and the scenario that is absolutely advantageous for us is when our firepower dismantles Tyotino from 3 sides, just like that, as if the guys are simply taking apart Tyotino. And in fact, including this Su-35, which was flying to carry out a deblockade operation. As far as I know, again, as I said, to support their fighters in Tyotkino, it ended up falling victim to the brave ones, as they say. And the Russian command continues to throw fresh cannon fodder here, which will keep being destroyed. In my opinion, this is the ideal scenario need to keep holding the Russians in this bloody, fiery trap. Besides that, in the north of Sumy region, there are also changes on the deep state map, which indicate the complete occupation of Loknya. And I saw a number of Ukrainian media outlets that are really hyping this up as a major betrayal, a problem, and similar things. In reality, Loknya was captured quite some time ago. In fact, from what I know, Kindrativka is almost completely occupied by the enemy. In reality, fighting is taking place on the outskirts of Yablunivka and almost in Yablunivka itself. And Yunakivka as well, Russians are present on the outskirts of this village too. But this is a very large village, and to capture it, they will probably have to pay with the lives of at least 1,000 soldiers. And it's clear that the occupying forces' resources are not unlimited here. 50,000 troops who are already being worn down and will continue to be worn down at Yunakivka. Yunakivka is actually a very large fortified area of ours, very large. And the Russians will have to sweat here if they want to take it, although I do not rule out that they might take it. But this could really be the absolute limit of all their capabilities here.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Because now, and in fact, as far as I know, as of a few days ago, we can already talk about more or less a slowdown of the enemy. And in the worst case scenario, let's say, the front could stabilize on the approaches to the settlements of Khotin and Payzarivka. And along the line, let's say, Myropilia, Zapsilia. So in this way, the front could indeed be stabilized. The Russians can cut through. That is, yes. There is also a salient here, just like in the case of the Russian incursion of Tyotkino into our border. Here as well, there is a similar kind of incursion into the Russian, more precisely, into the Russian border in the area of Sudzha. This is the only kind of buffer zone that one can say the Russians are creating, but in reality, they are wiping it out completely. They will wipe it out, rest assured. They will completely wipe out a large grouping of their own troops. That is precisely why I am not painting any catastrophic scenario here. I am not depicting a disaster in the Sumy region, because exchanging the mining of certain territories for tens of thousands of Russian lives can actually be considered quite a successful operation, no matter how cynical that may sound from any perspective. Additionally, in reality, there are still opportunities in the occupied settlements to cut off the enemy's logistics using our drone systems, effectively turning their presence into isolated enclaves within these settlements. Enclaves very similar to, or rather exactly like the one Deep State reported about yesterday, describing Kindrashivka in the northern Kupiansk direction. So you can see such an enclave indeed of the enemy's presence. These are the Russians who made it, heroically made it to Kindrashivka to raise their flag. This is the very video, in fact, that is being circulated on Russian social media. Well, they raised the flag, good for them, reported on the capture of the settlement, but now they remain trapped because their logistics have been cut off. They have no way to connect with their own forces, and so they're sitting as an enclave in Kindrashivka. In fact, this thinning out, let's call it that of the line of contact, which Deep State also wrote about yesterday, is a very consistent trend across the entire front. Thinning out, that's probably the most appropriate and accurate term to use in order to describe what actually explains the creation and existence of such enclaves. Because very often along the line of contact, the Russians, especially in the current period, tend to take advantage of what's commonly called the greenery, which refers to the time when the vegetation is in full bloom and provides cover, let's put it that way. So thanks to the greenery, the Russians can simply walk into our rear positions because our front line is spread thin. We don't have that many infantry on the front lines. It's become clear that, first of all, we can't provide ourselves with that kind of manpower. And secondly, we don't have the luxury of having our infantry engage in firefights with the countless numbers of Russian infantry. We have switched to a different style of walking with drones, targeting these infantrymen. Accordingly, because not all sections of the front are under the visual control of our infantry's observation posts, the Russians can sometimes slip into the rear, but as soon as they are spotted by drones, they are immediately cut off, destroyed, captured, and assault groups are dispatched. And this is a continuous process, essentially happening on absolutely all sections of the front. This is exactly what I was talking about at the end of last week, by the way, and regarding the situation, for example, right here in the direction of Komar, Velika Novoselka, Bogatyria. This is basically the same story. If we look closely, even switch to the satellite map, it's clearly visible here that there is almost a continuous tree line along which the Russians were able to advance. Here's the tree line. Then it curves like this, and again, there's a tree line that leads toward Komar. The enemy basically moves along this tree line like this, and as soon as they step out of it, they get destroyed. It's a very similar situation. The same thing is happening in Kindrashivka in the Kupiansk direction, as Deep State reports. Well, I'm trying to convey to you, friends, the situation that right now, in fact, open source maps like Deep State, and honestly, even my own reviews, when we measure some positions with a ruler, well, I try not to do that. But in reality, there is a psychological shift happening. Understand this? Right now, the front line is not stable. It is very blurred. It's not like there's a clear red zone here. Here's what's been captured. Here's us. Here's the enemy. Everything is intertwined right now. It's not as stable as it's drawn, as it appears on the maps. The war has changed very, very, very significantly from how it started. But the main thing hasn't changed. Essentially, the enemy continues to exert pressure, focusing their main efforts on Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka. That is, in Pokrovsk, we have two particularly dangerous areas. These are, without a doubt, the southern part of Pokrovsk, where the Russians are advancing toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. And I think that, well, now everyone will once again start measuring everything by the number of kilometers to the Dnipropetrovsk region. But in reality, the war in Dnipropetrovsk has already been going on for a long time. I think that the new informational objective, after they were stalled in the Sumy region, in fact, they were stalled there very, very significantly. Now, the new informational objective, and we need to be prepared for this, is that this week, the topic of the Dnipropetrovsk region will resurface again, specifically about advances toward the borders of Dnipropetrovsk, beyond the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. Plus, it is not out of the question that there could also be an intensification of fighting in the Zaporizhia direction. So this southern section is dangerous. The northern section is also dangerous, where the enemy is expanding its zones of control. In particular, we can observe the enemy troops approaching Yablunivka. The objective for the summer campaign is clear: to cut off this so-called Toretsk salient and begin fighting for Kostiantynivka. This would be the enemy's #1 objective. The second objective, by the way, is to cut off the Siversky salient, because it has also been bothering the enemy for a long time. The situation here in the Siversky area, is important to emphasize that it has significantly worsened after Bilohorivka was effectively lost and the Russians moved in. Now they are trying to attack further to the west, and overall there is a very tricky combination of events unfolding here. The Russians are putting pressure on the Toretsk and Zarychny agglomeration. The Russians are also fighting in the Lyman area, specifically in the Serbryanske forestry. The entire Lyman frontier, let's put it this way, is in a very tense state, because the Russians have also set themselves one of the objectives and goals, and I want to emphasize this: why Donbas? Because one of their objectives, apart from advancing toward Kostiantynivka, is also to get closer to Lyman in order to actually begin the battles for the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. These are the kinds of plans the enemy has. And here, under no circumstances should we downplay, in terms of information, the significance, the role, or in general, the plans of the operation that the Russians are carrying out in the Ukrainian Donbas, because it is right here in the Donetsk region, that the enemy's #1 goal is to capture and break through the defenses of our entire Donetsk defensive stronghold. And here they are making their maximum effort. Up to 80 and perhaps even more % of all combat engagements are happening right here. But Ukrainian media are focusing on discussing Sumy region. Ukrainian media are discussing other locations. In Donbas, it feels as if, everything there is already, well, as if the ATO had happened. So what's going on there? Well, it's tough. It's always tough, always tough. What is there to say? What's left to talk about? We all already know that it's tough in Donbas. But in reality, the main point, the logic, and the twists and turns, including those of the summer enemy offensive, are all here. So, friends, that's the news we have. That's how things are. I urge you not to fall for these informational manipulations, and to keep a clear understanding in your mind of the trends in the development of the fighting. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and until we meet again.